Elena woke before the sun, as she always did. The morning light had not yet touched her curtains, but her eyes were already open, staring at the ceiling. She could feel it again, the quiet ache in her chest, the emptiness. It wasn't a sharp pain or a sudden sorrow. It was something deeper, something that had settled over the years, like dust on an unused table. Her body was alive, but her heart felt hollow, a space echoing with absence. She moved slowly through her small home, her slippers brushing the cold floor. The kettle hissed softly as she made her tea. Steam rose, twisting gently in the air, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. She watched it fade and whispered, "That's what I feel like, fading." She took a small sip and sat down by the window, looking at the world waking outside. Birds fluttered, the sky began to soften, and yet she felt nothing. No joy, no peace, not even sadness anymore. Just the quiet ache of being here and feeling empty inside. But far beyond her small window, heaven watched, and the one who fills what is hollow was already drawing near. Every day felt the same. Elena rose, tidied her small home, made her tea, swept the porch, and watched the hours slip by. The world outside her door went on living, children laughing, cars passing, neighbors chatting in the distance. She smiled at them when they waved, but when the door closed again, the silence returned. It wasn't loneliness she feared. She had long made peace with solitude. What she feared was meaninglessness, the feeling that her life, once full of love and purpose, had become a quiet echo of what once was. Sometimes she would sit in her chair for hours, the clock ticking steadily, wondering what she was waiting for. Maybe this is just how it ends, she thought, quietly. She had faith once, bright, burning faith, but now it flickered like an old candle, small and tired. "Maybe," she whispered one night, "I've just outlived my joy." She didn't know it yet, but joy was not gone. It was waiting, patient, eternal, for her heart to open again. There had been a time when Elena's life was full. Her husband's laughter filled the rooms. Her children's voices ran through the halls. Her heart had purpose and warmth. But one by one, those sounds faded. Her husband was the first to go, too soon, too suddenly. Then the children grown and gone, each caught in their own worlds, their own lives. They still called sometimes, but their voices were hurried, their love distant. "We'll come soon, Mama," they always said, but soon never seemed to arrive. She didn't blame them. Life moved on, and she didn't want to be a burden. Still, every time she hung up the phone, a quiet weight settled deeper in her heart. She wandered the house sometimes, running her hand along the furniture, whispering to the memories, "You're still here somewhere, aren't you?" But the house only sighed back. The emptiness wasn't just around her anymore. It had moved inside her. And yet, even in that hollow place, the spirit was waiting to whisper, "I can fill this too." There comes a point, Eleanor realized, when sadness no longer shouts. It sighs. Her grief had grown quiet, like an old friend who no longer needed to speak. She no longer asked why or how long. She simply moved through the days, doing what needed to be done, folding her blanket, watering her plants, heating soup for one. Her body continued out of habit, but her spirit had gone still. One afternoon, as she sat watching the light move across the floor, she whispered, "Maybe this is all that's left, a slow, waiting for the end." The thought didn't scare her. It didn't move her either. It simply was. She still believed in God, but he felt far away, not angry, not absent, just quiet, the kind of quiet that makes a heart wonder if heaven had simply moved on. Yet behind that silence, love waited, not impatiently but tenderly. For the Lord does not rush those who have grown weary. He waits until the soul is ready to feel again. And Elena's time was coming. That night, as the clock struck 2, Elena awoke suddenly. The world was still, her room bathed in pale moonlight. Without really thinking, she sat up and whispered into the darkness, "Are you still there?" Her voice cracked, fragile from disuse. "I don't need an answer. I just want to know if you still see me." Tears filled her eyes, surprising her. It had been so long since she had cried. The tears came quietly, soaking her hands as she pressed them to her face. "I don't want anything," she said through her sobs. "Not health, not money, not even time. I just want to feel you again." There was no sound in reply, but as her sobs slowed, something soft stirred in her chest, a warmth she couldn't explain. Not loud, not clear, just there. It lingered only a moment, then faded, but it was enough to keep her heart open a little longer. He hadn't spoken yet, but he had listened, and that, for the first time in years, made her feel alive. The next evening, Elena stood before her small mirror in the dim light of her bedroom. The face looking back at her seemed older than she remembered, lined, pale, tired. She studied her own reflection for a long time. It wasn't vanity. It was curiosity. "Is that really me?" she whispered. "Is this what's left?" She saw the woman she had become. One who had endured, one who had lost much, one who had stopped expecting beauty to return. Then, suddenly, something broke inside her. She covered her face and began to weep, not just for the years that had passed, but for the woman she had stopped being. "Where did I go, Lord?" she cried softly. "Where did the joy go?" The silence answered her with mercy, and deep within that silence, almost imperceptibly, came a whisper, gentle as breath. "You are still mine." Her hands trembled. She looked back at her reflection, and for the first time in years saw not emptiness, but hope flickering behind her eyes. The following morning, Elena woke to a feeling she couldn't name. It wasn't joy yet, not even peace, but something softer, like a thread of warmth running through the coldness of her chest. As she sipped her tea, she found herself thinking of the past. Not the painful parts this time, but the sacred ones. She remembered her husband's laughter echoing in the kitchen, the way her children once sang off-key at the dinner table. And then, more faintly, she remembered her prayers. There had been a time when she spoke to God like a friend, freely, often, honestly. She had forgotten that part of herself, buried it under the years of loss and silence. But now, those memories rose like fragile blossoms, pushing through winter soil. "I used to feel you," she whispered into the still room. "Once, I really did." And for a heartbeat, something stirred. Not outside, but deep within her spirit. It was as though her own heart was answering, awakening. The memory of his nearness had opened a door she thought was locked forever, and through it, love began to return. That evening, the sky turned a soft, muted blue as rain began to fall. Elena sat by her window, watching the drops race down the glass. The rhythm of it was soothing, like a slow heartbeat. The house was silent but not empty. There was something alive in the quiet, a kind of presence she couldn't explain. She closed her eyes. The sound of the rain grew distant, and all that remained was stillness, deep, thick, holy. It was not the emptiness she had known before. This stillness had weight, as though the air itself had begun to listen. Her breathing slowed. She didn't dare speak. She just sat there, hands folded, tears sliding quietly down her face. Then, without warning, the warmth returned, gentle but sure, moving from her chest to her hands, then spreading through her whole body. It was the same feeling she had known in her youth, the one she had prayed would come back. But this time, it was stronger. It stayed. When Elena finally opened her eyes, the room glowed faintly. Not from the candle, not from the rain light, but from something unseen. And then, deep within her spirit, she heard it. Not loud, not distant, just there, like a voice made of peace itself. "Elena," she gasped softly, pressing her hand to her chest. It had been so long since anyone had said her name with love. Her lips trembled. "Lord," the voice came again, steady and kind. "I never left you. You only stopped hearing me through the noise of sorrow." Tears poured down her cheeks. She covered her face, weeping softly. "I thought you had gone." "I was in the emptiness," the voice whispered, waiting to fill it. The warmth deepened, wrapping her like a blanket. Her breathing steadied. Her tears quieted. In that single moment, the hollow space inside her was no longer a void. It was full of him, full of life. The next few days felt different, lighter, though the world around her remained unchanged. Elena woke with a quiet anticipation, a sense that something inside her was finally being restored. The air in her home seemed warmer, as though the walls themselves were no longer just cold structures, but living parts of her life. When she moved through the rooms, she felt an almost physical warmth, not from the heating, but from the presence of something greater. She sat by the window one afternoon, hands resting in her lap, staring out at the rain-soaked earth. She didn't need to speak. The warmth filled the silence, and for the first time in years she realized the emptiness she had felt wasn't because something was missing. It was because she had been made to hold something. And now that space was being filled, not by things, but by him. A smile, faint but real, curved on her lips. The ache was still there, but it no longer defined her. Now it was the place where his presence dwelt. One evening, as Elena prepared her simple dinner, a melody filled her heart, soft, ancient, beautiful. There was no music, no voice, yet the tune was unmistakable. It was a song of peace, of love, of grace that had always been around her, waiting for her to hear. She stopped, her hands stilling in mid-motion, and closed her eyes. The song rose and fell in her chest, carried by her breath. Her heart beat in time with it, and for the first time in so long, she felt truly alive. It wasn't a song of celebration, but of rest, like a lullaby sung not by a mother but by God himself, rocking her soul to sleep. Tears filled her eyes. She didn't need to understand the melody. She didn't need to sing it aloud. All she needed was to feel it, to let it surround her. And in that moment she realized her heart had not been empty. It had just needed to learn to listen to the quiet songs of heaven. After that, small things began to shift, not in her circumstances, but in her perception. Elena started to notice the simple gifts of love hidden in the world around her. The way the sun bathed the kitchen table in gold each morning. The sound of children laughing as they played outside. The old cat curling up beside her in the evening, purring softly. Even the smallest things began to shine with meaning, like God's love made visible in moments too small to be noticed before. One morning, a neighbor knocked on her door with a jar of honey, saying, "I thought you might like this." Elena smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. "You're so kind," she said softly. "I don't need anything, but it means so much." In every moment, Elena began to feel like she was being looked after, and not just by people, but by the God who had filled her empty heart with love. Her life hadn't changed outwardly, but inside, everything was different. Every corner, every detail, felt full of purpose, full of grace, and she knew with certainty that she had never truly been alone. The love that had once returned quietly to Elena's heart began to overflow in small, unexpected ways. She found herself smiling at strangers in the market, offering kind words to neighbors, writing little notes of encouragement she left tucked under doors. At first it surprised her, this new strength to reach out again. For so long she had feared being hurt, or ignored, or forgotten. But now love no longer asked anything in return. It simply wanted to give. One afternoon, she baked bread for the first time in years. The scent filled her house, soft and warm, and she thought, maybe I should share this. So she did. She walked slowly to the home of an elderly man who lived alone down the street. When he opened the door, surprised, she smiled and said, "I made too much." He laughed, the kind of laughter that shakes off years of dust. "Thank you," he said softly. And as Elena walked home, she felt it, that unmistakable warmth inside her chest. The same presence that had filled her emptiness was now flowing through her, reaching others. Her heart had not only been healed, it had been transformed into a vessel for his love. One evening, as the sun sank low, there was a knock on Elena's door. She opened it to find a young woman standing there, eyes red from tears. "Mrs. Elena," she said softly, "I'm sorry to bother you. I just I didn't know where else to go." Elena invited her in without hesitation. The woman sat at her small table and began to talk about a broken relationship, about loneliness, about feeling empty inside. Every word struck a familiar chord in Elena's heart. When the woman finished, Elena reached across the table and took her hands. "I know that feeling," she said gently. "I lived with it for years. But do you know what I've learned?" The young woman shook her head, wiping her tears. "That emptiness isn't a curse," Elena continued. "It's a space. And Jesus is waiting to fill it, just as he filled mine." The woman began to cry again, but this time her tears were softer. Elena smiled, her thumb brushing the girl's hand. "He hasn't forgotten you, dear. He's closer than you think." And for a long moment neither spoke, but both felt the quiet, undeniable peace that comes when heaven enters a humble room. From that night on, people began to visit Elena often, sometimes for tea, sometimes for comfort, sometimes just to sit in silence. Her home became a small sanctuary, a resting place for weary souls. She never preached, never lectured. She simply listened, smiled, and let her peace speak. Her presence itself became prayer, quiet, steady, filled with the same love that had healed her. One afternoon, as she looked around her small living room, now filled with laughter and gentle conversation, she felt tears in her eyes. She had once prayed for God to fill her emptiness. Now that emptiness had become the very space from which love flowed outward to others. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't just fill me, you overflowed me." And somewhere, deep in her spirit, she heard a response, tender and full of joy. "That's what I always meant to do." Elena smiled, closing her eyes as sunlight streamed across her face. Her heart, once hollow, now beat in rhythm with heaven. There was no more emptiness left, only love. As the years continued, Elena's days grew slower but softer. Her hair turned silver, her hands thin and worn, yet her heart was young again. Each morning, she woke with a quiet thankfulness, whispering her first words into the still air. "Thank you, Jesus, for staying." She no longer filled her days with worry or longing. Instead, she lived them as prayers, each small act a hymn of gratitude. When she watered her plants, she thanked him for the rain. When she sat by the window, she thanked him for light. When she lay down at night, she thanked him simply for being near. One evening, as twilight painted her home in soft gold, she sat with her hands folded in her lap and said aloud, "I thought you'd forgotten me once. I see now. You were waiting to make room for yourself." Her voice trembled as she whispered, "My heart was empty so you could fill it." And in the silence that followed, she felt it again, that holy warmth rising within her. Peace, presence, completion. Elena's gratitude was no longer just words. It was worship, the kind that needs no sound. That winter came gently, with soft snow and long silent nights. Elena's strength had begun to fade, but she met each day with peace, her spirit steady and sure. She lit a candle every evening and placed it on her table, watching the flame flicker in the still air. To her, it wasn't just light, it was a reminder. He was still here. Her hands trembled more now, and her breaths came slower, but her eyes shone brighter than they had in years. One night, as she sat watching the candle burn low, she whispered, "You filled me, Lord. You never stopped." Her voice was barely audible, but heaven heard it clearly. As she closed her eyes, she felt that warmth again, the same warmth that had found her in emptiness, the same voice that had called her name. "You are full now," the voice whispered. "Rest, my beloved." The flame flickered once, twice, then steadied, burning softly through the night, like a heart that refuses to go dark. When morning came, the world outside her window glowed with pale light. The candle had burned out, its wax pooled and still. Elena sat in her chair, her hands resting peacefully on her lap, her head tilted slightly toward the dawn. Her face was calm, serene, her eyes closed, her lips curved in the faintest smile. She looked as though she was still listening, and perhaps she was. for the one who had filled her heart in life had now filled her soul completely. The love she had once felt as warmth had become light, and that light had carried her home. There was no emptiness left, only fullness, pure and eternal. In her small house, silence lingered, but it was no longer hollow. It pulsed gently, as if the walls themselves remembered what it meant to be filled by God. The woman who once lived with an empty heart had left behind a home overflowing with peace. The morning sun spilled gently through the window, touching everything it met with gold. The candle Elena had lit the night before had burned to its end, yet the room seemed brighter than ever. Neighbors came later that day. They found her just as she was, peaceful, serene, as though she had simply drifted from rest into eternity. No fear, no struggle, only stillness wrapped in grace. They whispered softly as they entered, but soon their words faded, overtaken by something they couldn't quite name, a presence that filled the small home. The air felt warm, tender, alive. One of them, a young woman whom Elena had once comforted, sat down and began to weep. "She's gone," she said through her tears, "but it feels like she's still here." And she was. The peace that had filled Elena's heart now filled her home. The warmth that had healed her soul lingered in every corner. Her love had not ended. It had multiplied, flowing invisibly through every person who had ever sat at her table, every neighbor she had smiled at, every quiet prayer she had whispered for others. The light that filled her had not gone out. It had spread. Weeks passed, then months. The world moved on, but the little house at the edge of town remained a place of quiet wonder. Visitors often said they felt peace there, the kind of peace that couldn't be explained. Some came to pray, others to sit in silence, all left with tears in their eyes and warmth in their hearts, and those who knew Elena would say, "It's because she was never really gone. Her heart stayed full, and it keeps filling others." In heaven, Elena's spirit rested in the arms of the one who had filled her all along. She had no emptiness left, only joy, only love. Her soul had become what it was always meant to be, a vessel of divine fullness. And here on earth, her story whispered its truth to anyone who felt hollow, unseen, forgotten. The heart that makes room for Jesus never stays empty. Her emptiness had once been her pain. Now it was her miracle. And in that miracle, love remained, forever overflowing, never ending.